Understanding the SEP-IRA. Let's break it down on this episode of the Hawaii Retirement Show. All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Hawaii Retirement Show. Today's episode, we're talking about the SEP-IRA, the Simplified Employee Pension IRA. We talked about this briefly in the past, but it's come up in my my day-to-day life here a couple times now in conversations with some people. So I thought, it's a good idea to maybe revisit some of the who, what's, where's, why's of the SEP-IRA. So the SEP-IRA is pretty much a simple, flexible retirement tool for small business owners and self-employed individuals, right? So you might be thinking, well, I'm not a self-employed individual or a small business owner. I don't really need to know this, but it's good to know what it is. Maybe you find yourself as the employee of a small business who offers a SEP-IRA. Maybe you never come across the SEP-IRA ever in your life, but still, knowledge is power. It's good to understand what these things are, so when you hear it in passing or it comes up, you have an idea of what it is and how it fits into the whole, financial retirement planning landscape there. So what makes the SEP-IRA so appealing is that there's minimal filing requirements. It's real easy to set up and get going, and it's not a lot of paperwork, and it's pretty straightforward. So that's why it's kind of real appealing. The other alternatives for, small business owners, self-employed individuals would be those solo 401ks or maybe the simple IRAs and stuff like that. But we'll dive into some, the participation rules, how contributions, distributions, investing, and all these kind of things work with the SEP-IRA. So let's start off with a little history. I always like looking back to how things, kind of came to be. And so we'll look at a little SEP-IRA history here. So it was created under the 1978 Revenue Act. And Congress wanted to make saving for retirement as easy for small businesses as it was for corporations and reduce the administrative costs that came with implementing a retirement plan for a company, right? So the Tax Reform Act of 1986, it introduced the uniform participation, the non-discrimination rules, and standardized the contribution limits. So from what I understand, the SEP-IRA became widely adopted in the 90s and 2000s. And the reason being is financial institutions, custodians, began offering simplified turnkey SEP-IRA products, right? So it's already a really easy, simple product, in compared to others to kind of get set up. But these financial institutions kind of streamlined that and set up these turnkey SEP-IRA products, making it even easier in the 90s and 2000s. Okay, so that's a little history. Let's talk about the participation rules of a SEP-IRA. And what I mean by participation is who has to be participating in the SEP-IRA, right? There's minimum requirements. And the three minimum requirements for participation is you must be age 21 or older, worked 3 of the last 5 years, and earned $750 or more in a given year, right? And that's the 2025 threshold. So I guess that $750 would go up with inflation. Okay, so if you satisfy those criteria, okay, and you're in a company that offers a SEP-IRA, you must be included and participating in that SEP-IRA. Now, if you don't meet that criteria, let's say you're a business owner and you hire somebody who's 18 years old, they're not 21, they're not minimum of 21 or older, you can exclude them from participating in the SEP-IRA. But if they meet the criteria, the minimum criteria, they have to participate. You have to include them in the SEP-IRA. Okay, if you're self-employed, it doesn't matter because it's just you, right? But if you have employees, that's kind of what we're talking about here. With these participation rules, you can make them less restrictive, but not more restrictive. Meaning maybe you do want to include somebody who's under 21. You can do that, but you can't make the age limit higher, right? You can reduce and say, well, as long as you work 1 out of the last 5 years with me, I'll include you, right? But you can't make it, you have to work more than 3 out of the last 5 years, right? You can make it less restrictive, but not more restrictive. Okay. Another thing to consider with participation rules, especially when it comes to the 3 out of the 5 years, is even if they're part-time, or if they're no longer employed, or if they passed away, let's say they passed away halfway through the year, if they met that criteria, earned $750 or more, age 21 or older, worked 3 of the last 5 years, you need to include them. The only 2 exceptions are union employees with bargain retirement benefits and non-resident aliens with no U.S. income. So again, the big one there is that 3 out of 5 year rule, right? Let's say you hired somebody in October. You're running a small business, you have the SEP-IRA, you hire somebody in October, and they earned over $750 for that year, and they're over 21. That individual, that year where they only work 3 months for you, counts as 1 year, right, for 3 out of the 5, even though it was only a couple months, right? Same thing is true. Maybe they just work a few months early in the year, right? Maybe they work seasonally or whatever it might be. As long as they are over 21, made $750 in that year, and they worked any amount of time, right? There's no kind of minimum time worked in the year. But if they worked, for 1 month for you in that year, that counts as one of the years for the 3 out of 5 year rule. Okay. So establishing a SEP-IRA is pretty straightforward. There's 3 basic steps, right? You sign a written plan, which is Form 5305-SEP. Okay, that's the IRS form. But again, these financial institutions, they kind of provide it when you go to set up this SEP-IRA, or your CPA can help you out with it as well. But the way the financial institutions kind of make this turnkey, you just set up, click, and the form is kind of included in the onboarding process with that SEP-IRA. Okay, the other 2 steps are you need to notify all eligible employees, and then lastly, open a SEP-IRA for each participant. Okay, so if you're self-employed, you just open a SEP-IRA for yourself. If you have other employees, you need to open SEP-IRA accounts for each participant. Okay. Now, the timeline to establish and contribute to a SEP-IRA is the tax filing deadline plus extensions, right? So you can wait until, if your tax filing deadline is April 15th, which most people's are, but maybe you're not working off of a calendar year for your business, you have a fiscal year, but it's the tax filing deadline plus extensions, then you can decide when to establish a SEP-IRA. Same thing for contributions. Maybe you wait until you figure things out after the calendar year has ended, and maybe it's February, March, and you say, okay, looking at how things are going to play out, I have until the deadline plus extensions if I need to file for an extension to decide how much I'm going to contribute. And if you haven't set up a plan, you can determine if you want to set one up to that time for the previous year. Okay. Let's talk about contribution rules for the SEP-IRA. It's important to know only the employer can contribute. Employees cannot contribute to a SEP-IRA. SEP-IRA contributions are made by the business, right? If you're self-employed, it's made by your company, yourself, right? And that's why, and we'll get into why the percentage for self-employment contributions are different than if you're a W-2. But the contributions are made only by the employer, not by the employees. Even if an employee says, well, I have some extra change in my pocket, I want to contribute a little more this year to my retirement plan, they could look to a regular traditional IRA or Roth IRA for themselves, but they cannot contribute to a SEP-IRA. SEP-IRA contributions are only made by the employer. Now, also, SEP-IRA contributions are made as a percentage of each employee's compensation. Again, if you're just self-employed and it's just you, it's going to be a percentage based off of your self-employment income. But if you have employees, it's got to be the same percentage, right? So you can't say, well, I'm the boss, I'm going to do 18% contribution from me, and I want to do 13% contribution for this person. It's like, no, if you choose 18%, everybody who's eligible to participate needs to get 18% of their compensation as a contribution to the SEP-IRA. Now, the nice thing with contributions, and the thing that really makes the SEP-IRA, I think, really appealing, is there's no requirement for substantial or recurring contributions, right? If you have a down year, you can say, well, I'm not contributing to the SEP this year for myself or my employees. Or if you have a great year, you could say, okay, I'm going to try to max out these contributions to the SEP and take these deductions, right? So it's perfect if you have fluctuating income. It provides a lot of flexibility there of if and how much you want to contribute. Okay, next thing we got to talk about, and this is a really important one that gets people tripped up, and it got me tripped up when I was first learning about the SEP-IRA years ago for my my CFP and whatnot. Is there's two limits or thresholds that you need to keep in mind. Okay, if you're a W-2 employee, right? So even if you're self-employed and you run your business as an S corp, you're still considered an employee, right? So you're W-2. Or if you're running a small business and everybody's W-2, the maximum contribution limit is 25% of compensation. Okay, up to $72,000. So $72,000 is the 2026 limit that gets adjusted for inflation. That goes through, Congress, and the IRS sets those limits, and they get adjusted every year. But the 25% remains the same. Okay, 25% of compensation if you're W-2. Okay, if you're self-employed, you're a sole proprietor, you're a single member LLC, right? Disregarded entity. It's not 25% of compensation. It's 20% of net self-employment income. Okay, so think 25% if you're W-2, 20% of net self-employment income if you're self-employed, right? It's just you, sole proprietor. You're not an S corp. One thing before we kind of dive a little deeper into that 20% for self-employed individuals is it's important to remember there's no catch-up contributions. Okay, so if you're 50 or older with, like, let's say your own IRA or your 401k, your TSB, you do have the ability to make catch-up contributions. SEP-IRAs, there are no catch-up contributions. Okay, so diving a little deeper into that 20%, if you're self-employed, right, Schedule C, you're not W-2 from your business, the reason it's lower than the 25% of compensation if you're W-2 is what they're doing is you're going to take out the contribution itself from your self-employment income, right? So the way they run the calculation is they want to base it off your compensation after you've taken out the deduction for self-employment tax, right? 7.65 for Social Security and Medicare because you get a deduction for that, and they want to take out the SEP contribution itself. The SEP contribution itself is why the rate is 20% instead of 25% for the maximum you can contribute. Okay, and the formula to get that would be like, it'd be 25% or 0.25 divided by 1.25, and that gives you your 20%. Okay, and that's the adjusted rate for self-employed, sole proprietors. That's what it's based off of. It gets a little tricky, but I think the simplest way to approach it is just think, okay, am I W-2 of my business? Or am I employed as a W-2? Okay, well then it's 25% of compensation. Okay. Now, if you're self-employed, Schedule C, you run some business and it's just you, then you're looking at 20% of net income from self-employment, right? So after the deductions and whatnot, your net income from self-employment. Okay, so I was going to do an example. It's kind of rough with the audio format, but let's say you had somebody, let's say there's Kalani, right? He's a sole proprietor. He runs a one-man show, Schedule C. He's got self-employment income of $100,000. Okay, and he wants to contribute to a SEP for himself. Okay, first thing he needs to do is subtract that FICA, Social Security and Medicare, the self-employment tax, 7.65, okay, because we need to figure out his net income from self-employment. And the reason you deduct this is because he gets a deduction on this for the business, right? So that's $7,650. You subtract that from his previous net Schedule C business income, right? That gives him an adjusted income of $92,350. Now, if he wanted to contribute as much as he can, okay, he would look at 20%, right? Can't be 25% because he's self-employed, sole proprietor, Schedule C. So instead of 25%, we're using 20%. So with his $92,350 at 20%, the max he can contribute is $18,470. That's the most. If he goes above that, then he's going to have issues figuring out because he overfunded his SEP for the year. Now, let's say you had a ton of income, right? You made a lot of money, and so maybe the percentage doesn't fall into play, but you're still limited by the $72,000 maximum limit for the year, right? The IRS sets a cap on it, and that gets adjusted for inflation. So it's either the percentage is going to limit the maximum contribution, or it's that amount that's determined every year, the limit that's set, which is $72,000 for 2026. Okay? Clear as mud, but hopefully your CPA will help you figure that things out. And that's why it's nice too. You have until the tax filing deadline plus extensions to determine how much you're going to contribute. There's a lot of flexibility in there. You don't have to contribute early on when you don't know maybe how much you want to contribute. Okay, so as far as deductions, the SEP-IRA contributions are deductible to the business, right? They're deductible expense. So if you had, for instance, in our previous example, he was able to make an $18,470 of contributions for himself as a sole proprietor. Okay, that money is deducted. It's excluded from his compensation, right, for tax purposes. Now, if you have a business and you're maxing it out at 25% contributions for yourself and you got a couple employees, all those contributions are deducted as an expense to the business, right? You get to deduct all those. So it's definitely beneficial there. Now, let's talk about from the employee perspective, okay? And this could be yourself if you're running an S-Corp, or it could be if you have employees. Employees, the contributions are excluded from their income. Okay, it's not included in income for taxes, and also they don't have to pay the FICA or FUTA taxes on it, right? The caveat to this is recently, within the past couple years here, it's probably been, longer than that, 3 or 4 years, there is the option to do a Roth SEP-IRA, okay? And as you folks already know, a Roth SEP-IRA, you pay the taxes now and don't have to pay the taxes later, right? So if you are utilizing a Roth SEP-IRA, then contributions are included in the income for employees. Okay, business still gets the tax deduction for the contributions to its employees. The employee itself, whether that's you or other employees, that money will be included in your income if it's a Roth SEP-IRA. If it's not a Roth, it's excluded from your income. Okay, so, can offer a lot of benefits for tax deductions. One thing about the Roth that I want to mention, just because it came up, is the Roth is optional, right? You're not required to provide a Roth if you are the business owner, and custodians aren't required to offer a Roth SEP-IRA option. It's optional, not mandatory, right? Okay, so let's move on to vesting and withdrawals. It's important to note immediate vesting, right? Once the money is contributed on behalf of the business to the employee, or if you're self-employed, you make the SEP-IRA contributions to yourself, it's immediately vested. Okay, there's no vesting rules around it. However, when it comes to withdrawals, it still kind of follows the same rules as any other retirement account, right? The 10% penalty if you make withdrawals before 59 and a half, other than those few exceptions out there, right? The $10,000 for first time home purchase, and the other things out there, the medical and whatnot. There's a few exceptions, but otherwise the 10% penalty before 59 and a half holds. The distributions, if it wasn't a Roth, will be taxed at ordinary income. But theoretically, you're allowed to withdraw those contributions to your SEP-IRA at any time. It's just there's going to be taxes and potentially a 10% penalty if you do. Another thing to note is you're not stuck with the SEP-IRA. Whether you were the employee or you're the self-employed individual, later on you can move this, whether that's through a direct transfer, a rollover, to other retirement accounts, right? It could be to a solo 401k. It could be to your personal, traditional IRA. It could be to, other employer plans are going to have rules around this, and it's up to them whether they want to accept these kinds of things. I don't think they'll accept a SEP-IRA, but they might. Some of them accept, transfers into the custodian if it's an employer-sponsored plan, but you can definitely move it or roll it over, transfer it to a solo 401k or to your regular IRA later on, right? Maybe you want to consolidate things later on. You're no longer an employee of that business, or you're no longer the business owner running the SEP-IRA, and you want to, roll over into another retirement account to consolidate things. You can do that. Couple tax planning opportunities when it comes to the SEP-IRA. You can have a SEP-IRA and still have and make contributions to a traditional or Roth IRA of your own, right? Now, keep in mind there's different rules around those regular traditional and Roth IRAs for who can make contributions, how much, and if it's tax deductible or the income thresholds for Roth. So all those regular IRA rules still apply, but having a SEP-IRA doesn't stop you from also having a traditional or Roth IRA or participating in another employer plan, right? That's also possible. Other tax planning opportunities, I think the big one is the flexibility. If you have a really high income year, you can kind of take that big deduction in that year, right? Or if you have a down year, you can say, well, I'm not going to make any contributions this year. That flexibility, I think, is the big one. And then obviously you have until the tax filing deadline. I think that's great. The same is true for your regular traditional and Roth IRAs. You have until April 15th to decide if you want to make any contributions for the previous year, right? So that provides a lot of, important tax planning opportunities. Again, as the employer, those contributions are deductible. And as the employee, it's excluded from your income unless it's the Roth SEP-IRA, right? So a lot of things to consider there when it comes to tax planning around these. I'd say the biggest place where people get kind of tripped up is if you have employees forgetting who must be included, right? Who meets the participation rules and must be included and must be contributed to for the SEP-IRA, right? Even if they're part-timers or they left the company early or they passed away, or maybe you didn't think about it, but they meet the earning threshold, right? I think people get tripped up by not understanding who they have to contribute for. The other one would be, again, understanding, my upper limits. Is it the 25%, because it's W-2, or is it 20% because we're self-employed, Schedule C? And then even beyond those percentages, understanding that there's always going to be an upper limit, right? For 2026, it's $72,000 maximum contribution, regardless of the percentages, right? The SEP-IRA, I think, is very straightforward and easy to implement and easy to stay within the rules there. But if you do overfund or you don't contribute for an employee who should have been getting contributions, then it can definitely get a little sticky. And that's why you want to kind of consult with a CPA, financial advisor, or just do a lot of due diligence yourself if you are going to implement this yourself, so that you kind of understand the rules around it. So I think that about wraps it up here for the SEP-IRA. Super simple, minimum paperwork, no annual filings. It's a great tool, whether you run a small business or you're self-employed, running a sole proprietorship, or just have a little side business of your own. Can be a great tool. I think coming up on the show, we're going to have SHIP Hawaii. Those is the state healthcare program to come on and talk about Medicare. And then I think I'm going to do an episode talking about the recent changes to the mandatory Roth contributions for catch-up contributions to employer-sponsored plans, including the TSP and some other employer-sponsored plans. But that wraps it up. If there's anything in particular you'd like me to talk about on the show going forward, email it over to aloha@hawaiiretirementshow.com, and we'll catch everyone on the next one.
The opinions and statements presented on this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Never make any investment or financial decisions based on information offered on this show without first consulting your financial, legal, or tax advisor. All economic and performance information mentioned on the show is historical in nature and is not indicative of any future results. All indices mentioned on this show are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Lastly, all opinions expressed by Jason Katita and any guests on the show are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of or are endorsed by ToBA Financial. For Jason Katita, investment advisory services are offered through ToBA Financial LLC, a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the state of Hawaii and in other jurisdictions where exempt from registration.